My name is David. I'm 44 years old, and this is the testimony of how Jesus Christ saved me from 27 years of homosexuality. I speak these things in love, not out of hatred. I speak these things out of somebody who's been there, who knows what it's like, who knows what it's like to live in that, who knows how hopeless it is. Sure, you may enjoy your life, you may enjoy aspects of your life, you may enjoy the sexual aspects of it, the alcohol, what have you, but there's really no permanent joy in it. Eventually it goes away and you have to do more, you have to seek more. So I ask you to look for the real love, the real joy, the real contentment that can only be found in being made right with God through Christ's work on the cross. So I speak these things from love, not from hate. I speak these things not in judgment. You know, I'm not judging somebody. I'm just telling you what the Word of God says. The Word of God is what's going to judge us. In fact, the Word of God is what says all these things are wrong. I'm only telling people what the Word of God says. Like somebody should have told me, my friend who did try to tell me, he tried to tell me in the nicest way, in a Christian way, that I was living a lifestyle that was contrary to what God wanted, not just in my sexual orientation, but in every other aspect. He knew I was not really a Christian. So I speak these things in love, and I pray for your soul, and I pray that you will receive these things and that you will cry out to the Lord to save you and to make you a new creature, because He is mighty to save and He will save you. As I turned into my teens, we stopped going quite as much. My parents started having problems, and eventually my parents divorced, and sometime later my mom remarried. And after she was remarried, we started going back to church again. And I remember being kind of glad that I was going back to church, but it was all superficial. I would listen to the hymns and get emotional, and about that time my friends started going down front and making professions of faith. And so one Sunday I was moved by feelings and by the music and what my friends had done, and I went down front and made a decision for Christ. I didn't really know what I was doing or understand what was really taking place. I just knew something was wrong, and all my friends had done it, so I felt compelled to do it. So I walked down front and I sat down in the front pew, and the deacon came over and told me I needed to accept Jesus into my heart, and he told me to repeat this prayer. And I repeated the prayer, and I remember thinking, you know, is that all there is to it? And the next thing I know, he's clapping me on the back and standing me up in front of the congregation and telling me that I'm saved. And everybody congratulated me on the way out, and we all left and went to lunch, but I left there just as lost as when I came in. About 2 weeks later, I was just as lost when I was baptized, because I never really understood what I was doing. I never understood the doctrines of grace and mercy. I lived a fake Christian life for a while. I had the Christian mask that I would wear, and I would pretend to be religious, and I was probably about 16 at this age. And even then, sinful desires inside of me were growing. I can remember being at church and having sinful thoughts about other people there and other young guys my age. And I remember just telling myself, oh, they'll go away, it'll pass away, but yet it grew worse and worse as I went along. And sure enough, it wasn't that same year when in my late 16, being 16, I actually slept with the first male I ever had an opportunity to sleep with. And I remember at first being very ashamed of it and repulsed by what I had done, but yet the sinful nature of me also was satisfied in the pleasure of the sin itself. And as time went on, I became more comfortable with it, and I just remember thinking that it was natural, it was normal, and that I was just doing something. I felt that guilt because I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing at that age, but it was really because I was doing something against God. That's where the guilt came in. Before long, I got a job, and I started rebelling really against my parents in pretty much every way I could. I turned to drugs and alcohol and was exposed to it at work. I wanted to try to do as much as I could as a teenager and live as much as I could and rebel against my parents without really having to rebel and move out of their house. Eventually, my parents did kick me out of the house. We had a big blowout, and I ended up leaving. And I tried to clean myself up a little bit after that because it was hard trying to live on my own. So I tried to clean myself up, and I thought, well, I'll join the Navy, which had always been my dream to be in the Navy. I wanted to be a sailor. I shipped out to boot camp, and as soon as I got away from my parents, that was just like adding fuel to the fire. My sin really took off. I had an income. I had no parental people to answer to. I only had to answer to Uncle Sam, and I was exposed in California to all kinds of sins. It didn't take long before I actually got in trouble with my sins. I let my sins, all of them, the drinking, the drugs, the sex, get me into a state where I actually had to go into the hospital. And in the hospital, they ran several tests on me, and one of them was a drug test. And they discovered pretty much all my history of drug abuse up to that time. And also at that time, my sexual sins came out, and that was forbidden in the Navy to be a homosexual. Within a few months' time, my whole dream of being in the Navy as a career was gone. So I had nothing left to do but to follow my gay friends at that time. They were Canadians, and they were living in the States, but they were going back to Canada. So I followed them, and I left my parents. I didn't tell them where I was going. I just left and went. And for about 2 years, I lived up there in Canada, and I didn't tell my parents at all where I was at, where I didn't even contact them. For all they knew, I was dead somewhere. And I remember times where I would get very depressed and think, is there nothing more to life than drinking and doing drugs and this sin? And I was at a party, and everyone was inside, and they were drinking and doing all sorts of things. And I was out on the patio of the balcony, and I was so tired of fighting in life and so tired of all of it, and I was so disgusted with myself that I wanted to commit suicide. And I told myself I could just jump off the balcony, and 23 stories later, I would be dead and there wouldn't be anything left. So I decided I was going to do it, and I really was going to do it. I felt in my heart that I just was tired of it all. So I got up to the ledge, and I was going to jump, and right before I threw my leg over the ledge, I remember these thoughts just came out of nowhere. And one of the thoughts was, there's always hope in God. And I needed to find God to find that hope. And then the next major thought that really hit me was that I couldn't do this because it was wrong. It was a sin to take life, even my own life. And then the last thought I remember thinking was that I couldn't dishonor my parents this way. So I cried a little bit more, and I ended up backing away from the ledge and leaving the party, and I actually never saw most of those people ever again. And I continued to live my life, though, in drinking and alcohol. I didn't really clean up myself, or I tried to, but it didn't really work. And I eventually left Canada and went back home. I got caught working illegally in Canada, and I got sent back to Texas. And I remember when I got back to Texas, at first everything was good. I was glad to be around my family and everything, but then I started feeling guilty for my lifestyle around them and my drinking and all the things I was doing. I wanted so badly to get away from them again. So my partner at the time was getting transferred, and he's like, let's go to California. And I jumped at the chance to run, to get away from them, thinking that would make me feel better. I could live my life how I wanted to. And so we went off to California. In California, things they didn't get any better. I wasn't a different person. I was just the same person I'd always been, just with a little bit more money now. I had a decent job. I did all kinds of things I hadn't done before. I continued to decline in my sin and do more grievous things. I remember thinking, if I could just, try these other things, I would be happy, that would make me happy, that I would be fulfilled, that I would be at peace. And even though I was never at peace with who I really was, there was always a part of me that deep down inside, I knew it wasn't right, but I still wanted to pursue it. It was who I had become. I continued doing drugs and drinking, and finally I got really sick. I let myself get dehydrated really bad, and I ended up spending New Year's Eve in the hospital with the IV drip, getting rehydrated. And I didn't realize it, but at the time I had pneumonia, and I left the hospital, and I left there and I was really sick, and the dehydration, getting hydrated helped make me better for a little bit, but eventually the pneumonia caught up with me, and it ended me back up in the hospital. And I just remember my partner taking me into the hospital